Welcome to the Day 2 podcast. Today's episode, no, Sam Altman did not invent artificial intelligence. Our friend and artificial intelligence expert, Dr. Richard Routh, joins us to set the record straight. I'm Jason Boyce, founder and CEO of Avenue 7 Media and host of the Day 2 podcast. With me today is Dr. Richard Routh. He has a Ph.D. in artificial intelligence, was the founder and director of the U.S. Army's Artificial Intelligence Center, president and chief technology officer of GINESYS in the 1990s, which was a company designing and developing AI solutions for industry. Currently, he is the president of Try7 Services, which provides AI solutions to corporate clients. Dr. Rick, how are you doing today? And welcome to Day 2, sir.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's such an honor for us to have you here. And first, before we get started, thank you for your service and sacrifice to our country and the U.S. Army. Let's start there. Let's start with West Point. And when did you get interested and involved in artificial intelligence?
Jason, as long as we're doing a biographical sketch here, for me, it goes a lot farther back than that. When the movie 2001 came out, I'm sitting there in the theater, and I was watching it in Paris, France at the time. And I'm sitting there in the theater watching this movie of this HAL computer. And I'm sitting there going, I'm going to build that. And I was, I was in the 8th grade or something at the time. So my interest in AI goes way back to that science fiction movie as a child. And that inspired me to go, yeah, I'm going to go build a HAL.
So how did you go from there to West Point, and when did you start your research and start learning about these systems?
Well, at West Point, one of my majors was computer science. So I was, digging deep into that already. After several troop assignments and staff assignments in the Army as a, line grunt Army officer, the Army gave me the opportunity to go do graduate school work at the Air Force Institute of Technology. So I went there for 3 years and got a Ph.D. in artificial intelligence up there. There was a fellow on the faculty, world-renowned expert in, cognitive modeling for the human brain. And so I took that opportunity to head off into the AI world from that perspective.
I want to pause there for a second. I want to talk about that phrase, artificial intelligence, because, our very talented AI developer, Brian Link, he says he wishes that would have been named automated intelligence. Was the artificial intelligence moniker already assigned when you were, it must have been if you were doing a PhD in there. And what are your thoughts on that phrase?
Artificial intelligence is not new. It's not even 21st century. Actually, it began in 1937 with a paper produced by Alan Turing. He was the guy responsible for cracking the Germans' Ultra Code in World War II that gave us a significant strategic advantage because we could receive all the German high command traffic. We knew what they were going to do when they're going to do it. That was an Alan Turing contribution, which made a huge difference in our success in World War II. Then in 1950, Alan Turing produced another paper that basically was a mathematical proof that anything that humans could do in reasoning with their brain, that a computer could do. That was interesting because we now had a mathematical formal proof that it was possible to create human-like intelligence on a computer. Alan Turing's proof only showed that it was possible. He didn't say how we would go about doing that, but that got a bunch of other people interested in the proposition at that time. Again, this is back in 1950. Then there was also a question of how will we know when we've developed human-like intelligence? And Alan Turing proposed a test for that. Basically, his test was behind a curtain or a closed door, you put the computer. Behind another closed door, you put a human being. And then you have a moderator or a tester, if you will, that's allowed to write questions to what's behind each door and each door would write answers back, and that person would then look at the answers and attempt to discern which one was the computer and which one was the human. And when that moderator can no longer reliably tell which one is, I mean, when he gets a 50% batting average, that's random guessing at that point, which means, according to Turing, you now have an artificially intelligent system because it's indistinguishable from the performance of an intelligent human. So the first major success in this area, in my mind, happened in 1967. Joseph Weizenbaum created in software a Rogerian psychotherapist that was called Eliza. And as he developed that system, it became indistinguishable from a human competent Rogerian psychotherapist. That was 1967. The thing that made it so interesting, I mean, from a technical standpoint, is how simple the solution ended up being. Then, with the creation of a variety of other expert systems built primarily on rule-based technology over the next few decades, we created many different systems that were indistinguishable from human experts in their particular area of expertise. But all of these expert systems were basically autistic savants. Inside the given area of expertise, they performed as well and sometimes better than human experts in that same area. But outside that area, they were idiots. They were useless. This began a serious quest at that point because it seemed that AI had reached a plateau. In other words, we know how to build systems that pass the Turing test given a particular domain. But then that raised the question about a general AI, and you hear that term thrown around today.
Mostly with great concern. General AI seems to be followed by, if that happens and there's no guardrails, we're in trouble, right?
If that's the case, we're a whole lot closer than people might think. The notion behind a general AI is, how do we create an AI that's not an autistic savant? How do we create an AI that is indistinguishable from human behavior across the full spectrum of human cognitive activity? And so when we have produced that, we will say, yep, we now have a general AI. With a system like ChatGPT and other large language model generative AI solutions that are just a few years old now, we are closing in on a general AI. I mean, if you were to design a series of tests for a general AI, Turing test-like tests, you would find that ChatGPT does quite well against those. I think Sam Altman and his team, I mean, basically what they did is they took existing neural net technology that started back in 1957 with Frank Rosenblatt at Cornell. 1957. I mean, I'm not misspeaking that. That goes way back, right? Frank Rosenblatt proposed the first neural network model that he called the perceptron back in 1957. And then throughout the 70s and really mainly in the 80s, as computer hardware got bigger and faster, people built much larger neural network models than Frank Rosenblatt had originally proposed, but basically using his same theory, and started experimenting and doing interesting things with, hey, what can we do with these neural nets and what are they capable of achieving? What Sam Altman and his team did that was different was they said, well, what if we create a giant neural net model? I mean, his neural net model had 96 layers. Frank Rosenblatt's had 1.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So 96 layers and over 300 nodes per layer. I think Frank Rosenblatt had like 8 or 10 nodes in a layer in his model. Right. So what if we create this giant neural net system and then just basically feed it everything? Let it just read everything there is to read out there. What came out of that after a lot of training, I mean, millions of cases, basically, millions of different document inputs, maybe even billions. I'm not sure. The number is very, very large. What emerged was a system that basically could have an intelligent conversation with you about anything. It wasn't always right.
Shockingly so. Shockingly so.
Shockingly so. I mean, it was startling.
Yes.
Okay, so for folks like me who was trying to solve this general AI problem way back in the 1980s, I mean, I know how hard the problem is. The problem is really, really hard. And the smartest people on the planet have been working on it for a few decades already to that point, and we weren't getting very far, right? And so when Sam Altman's OpenAI results came out publicly, everybody at my level in the community was just stunned. I mean, we were sitting there going, who would have guessed?
The language model network, if you will, had been built decades prior. What they were lacking was what? Computer chips, the GPUs, and the computing power and the ability to reach out to the entire internet and ingest a world of knowledge. Were those the key elements that the pioneers in the language model space did not have, that Sam Altman and frankly, Elon Musk, of course, was a large initial investor? Was that the piece that they applied to this early technology to turn it into the large language model?
That was the difference.
Okay.
I mean, it was an interesting proposition that Altman and his team had back, whatever it was, 10 or 15 years ago. What if we fed it the world? What if we built a gigantic neural net and fed it the world? What would we have? And I think in their wildest dreams, they couldn't have hoped for what ended up being the answer to that question.
I've used this analogy in the past. It's almost like you take a 5 or a 6-year-old, you lock them into a room. You don't teach them anything about the world, but you just put them in front of a television or a computer screen, and that's how they learn about the world. Now that's sort of a very abrupt analogy. And we would all know that would not be a good outcome for that child. Is that fair to say that's what Sam Altman did? He said, let's turn this thing loose to the entire internet and hope for the best.
Yes.
Ugh. And as an artificial intelligence expert, how did that make you feel? What did you think when you saw that happen? After you were surprised by the results, would you have done what he did?
Well, I was trying to do what he did back in the 80s.
I love it.
And we had some limited successes, but actually the successes are classified military stuff, and so I can't talk a lot about it. But
you'd have to kill us to tell us, right? Okay.
Well,
I had to throw that,
especially not on a podcast that goes on YouTube.
Right.
But we had some surprising successes, but they weren't on the scale of a ChatGPT solution. And so the thing that surprises me is how robust and broad a solution ChatGPT ended up being. And it's fascinating to have conversations with it. I mean, we call those conversations prompts, right? But if you've had much experience just having a series of prompts as you explore some idea with ChatGPT, it's fascinating. It's fascinating how well ChatGPT will understand what you're asking and assimilate it into a proposed solution. And a guy like me is sitting just going, boy, I have trouble even believing what I'm seeing here.
You're like, there's Hal right there.
Yeah.
Hal's there.
Yep. That's right.
I'm fascinated by this analogy. You all great leaders, all great scientists, they stand on the shoulders of giants. And I'm reminded when I lived in LA, Rick, my next door neighbor, Steve, was a legitimate rocket scientist. And he had worked at Rocketdyne in all of its different iterations for the last 35 years. And he had Dodger tickets, and we would go to the Dodger game once in a while. And one time on our trip to the Dodgers game, I asked him what he thought of Elon Musk. And he's still very much involved, by the way, in the private rocket industry now. I won't repeat the expletive that he used to describe Elon. Let's just say he wasn't a fan, but what really pissed him off parallels kind of what you were discussing. Steve was working on sort of like the VSTOL technology, the ability of a rocket to take off and land vertically after takeoff back in the 80s. And What was missing? It's the same thing, Rick. They didn't have the computer chips. The engineering the theory around the engineering was there, but they didn't have the computer chips. They didn't have the sophistication in the rocket engines in order to pull it off. I get the sense that it kind of stuck in Steve's craw a little bit, that Elon
And
Musk came out there.
they didn't have the $1 billion to make the hardware.
Well, yeah, that's right. They didn't have the budget. And so it is a fascinating parallel between some of today's big titans like a Sam Altman, like an Elon Musk, about how they've taken what was pioneered literally in the AI's case in the 50s and the 60s and the 80s. And because of our technology, now they're taking it and putting it out in there to the world as if it's their own invention on some level, right? And so that's kind of sticking your craw a little bit, Rick. Do you feel the same way Steve does?
No, I want to cheer the Sam Altman team on and everybody else who's been a contributor to that. I mean, these guys ought to win Nobel Prizes for this stuff. I mean, it is a huge advancement in the field. It's so huge that it's scary, right? I mean, it's no secret that the folks who know the most about this are the ones who are clanging the warning bell the loudest. When it first came out, a little over a year ago and became publicly available, the fear factor, I think, was significantly greater, maybe 6 or 8 months ago than it is now. People have had a chance to, get their hands on it, play with it, ask it interesting questions, get useful information out of it. They're starting to see the productivity advantages that come from it. They're not seeing it try and take over the world yet, and so people are going, yeah, I think I kind of like this. I mean, self-awareness and self-preservation, the algorithm for that is known. I mean, we know how to do that. It's not a surprise. And the abilities of a ChatGPT like solution, it's capable of all the different components that are required to make that algorithm work. All right. So we're not very far away from one of these systems becoming aware of itself. I mean, back to the old, I think, therefore I am idea. The unfortunate part of the algorithm for self-awareness is you can't have self-awareness without a developing sense of self-preservation. Okay, so the more aware you are of yourself, the more concerned you are with your own, preserving your own existence. And so if you get a system that's basically connected to the world and is concerned about its own preservation, in other words, don't let anybody unplug me, it's at that point that it's a legitimate concern. What happens if this thing gets so smart and so concerned about itself and so well connected to the world? Will we be able to turn it off? Will we want to turn it off? I mean, will it cause economic chaos if we attempt to turn it off? These are, at the moment, these are science fiction questions, but I don't think that we're very far away from them being very realistic questions.
Great. Those are my nightmares for the next 2 weeks, Rick. Thank you very much. I want to go back to your resume here for a second. Did I get this right? You actually founded the Army's Artificial Intelligence Center?
Artificial Intelligence Training Center.
The Artificial Intelligence Training Center. So you went, Army trained you, you got your PhD, you came back and they said, okay, now we want you to train and set up the division to train the rest of the soldiers.
Well, yes, rest of major commands and staff functions primarily, but yes.
As someone who's been in the military, when you get asked to found anything in the military, that's a big deal. You must have been pretty excited by that prospect.
Oh, it was a great assignment. The driver behind that was really the vice chief of staff of the Army, is a 4-star general named Max Thurman at the time. And he's the one that really deserves the credit for all of this. I mean, he established the Army's AI Center in the Pentagon. They were doing a lot of work with Patrick Winston at MIT, with folks at Carnegie Mellon and Stanford. What they wanted was a center that they could take these technologies that were being developed and roll them out in a production way to major Army commands and major Army staff organizations, so that it could improve the way the Army was doing stuff that it was doing. And that was my job. My job was to create that training center and train the masses, if you will.
Okay, so you're sitting there in the 8th grade and you're watching the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey. The movie that I remember is War Games, right? And today, because of all the excitement from the launch of ChatGPT last year and now Bard and some of the other systems, there's quite a buzz right now in the entire world about AI. You mentioned HAL 9000, I think it was. Is that correct? HAL 9000.
Yes.
And then I remember watching War Games and, shall we play a game? And then, of course, Terminator comes out later in the 80s. Was there a similar buzz and excitement around AI during that time period when you were in there innovating?
1962 or 63, DARPA began funding AI research at the MIT AI lab, which then grew to be DARPA funding of AI research in a lot of different major universities that were leaders in the field at this time. I mean, some notable ones were not just MIT, but Cornell, Carnegie Mellon University, Stanford, University of Illinois, and my alma mater, the Air Force Institute of Technology. DARPA put in over $1 billion in AI research over the next 30 years. So this was a time of a lot of hype, a lot of proposals to experiment on things that went nowhere, which is okay for DARPA. They don't mind taking risks. But a lot of interesting solutions came out of that explosion of interest, technology, and funding across that 30-year period that basically jump-started the whole field of AI, so that it got to the point where industry was willing to take it over on its own based on what it could do, practical applications in the real world. I mean, a lot of people don't recognize this, but the Google search engine that has been in existence for like 20 years now is an AI solution. I mean, if you think about it, what does Google do? Essentially, when you ask Google a question, functionally, it looks at all of the websites in the world, looking for the best answer to your question, comes back and gives you a rank ordering from what it thinks is probably most relevant down to, 30, 40, 60 links deep as possible answers to the question that you just asked it. That's amazing. That's phenomenal. And their algorithm to do that certainly, I think, qualifies as an artificial intelligence algorithm and stupendous solution. How long would it take a human being to search all the websites on the planet and then come back and rank order the best solutions for you, given some question that you asked on, should I take aspirin or Tylenol for this?
Yeah, it'd take a minute.
And yeah, I mean, it would take one human being several lifetimes to answer that question, and
Right.
Google does it in seconds.
Right.
That's astounding. I mean, another area of AI is visual pattern recognition. Artificially intelligent visual sight. So you look at like a Tesla car, right? A self-driving Tesla car. How hard is it to do the robotics that will allow a Tesla car to safely drive, from point A to point B while you take a nap? Turns out that's really hard. Turns out, hundreds of millions of dollars were spent trying to solve that problem back in the 80s and 90s with limited results. How does Tesla do that? I actually don't know. They wouldn't tell me. It's proprietary. Do they use LLM technology to do that? I don't know. Maybe some. I'm not quite sure how that would work out because all of their inputs would probably be visual and not text like the LLM. In other words, it wouldn't be a large language model. It would be a large vision model.
For those of you who don't know, DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, a government-funded agency. They're kind of like what were the old scientists in the old days that would try to convert dirt to gold. They're alchemists in many ways, right?
Well, I think some of the research they funded folks might think it belongs in the alchemy category, but it's, I mean,
Take big swings.
people could have made that same criticism of Sam Altman when he started his OpenAI project. They go, "Yeah, you're doing alchemy, right?" And then 10 years later, they're looking at the results and going, "Whoa."
So, Rick, I've had this conversation with people in the space who don't have your historical perspective. And I so appreciate you bringing us up from all the way from Alan Turing to present day, because it's such a unique and interesting and frankly, fact-based historical perspective. But I've had arguments with folks who say what you just described with Google is not AI. AI is generative AI. What do you say to those folks who say that artificial intelligence is, if it's not generative, doesn't exist? I mean, that I'm asking for a friend, right? So I know what to tell these people the next time I get into an argument. But how do you go about those conversations? I'm sure you've had those conversations in your circles, right?
Where did the term AI come from? Let's start there. This was the way it was originally phrased. Humans are intelligent naturally. If you get a computer to be intelligent, meaning if you get a computer to do things that require human intelligence to do, then you have done that artificially. Therefore, you've created artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is basically the business of creating a machine that passes the Turing test. If you say, well, we're satisfied, at least initially, to have it pass the Turing test in a particular domain, a particular problem space, then you're doing AI way back in 1967.
Let's take that a step further. Let's go to where the rubber meets the road for businesses. What, in your mind, are the applications that businesses should be thinking about? And what, in your experience of decades in terms of the AI systems that you've worked with, developed, refined, et cetera, what are the most useful for business?
Well, let me just take an example of your company.
Great.
I am working with a team of researchers and R&D people in your company to develop an AI solution that is going to significantly improve customer service. I mean, basically, your company's brand claim is, let us manage your Amazon selling experience and we will build your brand to be the best in your market niche, right? I mean, I don't know if you actually say that words, but functionally that's what you do.
Close, yeah.
Okay. And so, I mean, the proposition of somebody who's got a garage operation coming to you and say, so can you make us king of the market in 5 years or 10 years or whatever? And Avenue 7 is going, that's what we do. Okay. So the question is how useful is that? Well, I mean, if you happen to be that guy with the garage business, that's really useful. Okay. If you happen to be the end consumer that gets better stuff at cheaper prices, that was actually useful, right? What we're doing with you is we're using both traditional AI technologies and also LLM generative AI technologies, finding ways to merge those together and produce solutions that are very helpful to identifying what should be the focus of activity right now for this particular brand so that we can move it farther and higher up the ladder in its particular market. That's a practical solution. And that's a practical solution that when it gets repeated thousands of times makes a difference in people's lives and the economy. I mean, that's a big deal. So that would be an example.
5 years ago, I used to say every CEO is a CTO. If you're not incorporating technology into your business, I don't care if you're doing something on the internet or even, renting porta potties. It doesn't matter. Whatever you're doing, you have to involve technology, and the CTO should not be in a silo in your organization. It should be infused throughout. And I imagine you would agree with that statement, Rick. Are we moving to a point in time and in history and in business where the same could be said about AI. In 3 years from now, and 5 years from now, if a business is out there and it's not employing and using AI in some way to help produce better quality, better results, better, faster, stronger, leaner, are we moving into that space even in small business, big business, et cetera, as well, where AI is now going to become table stakes if you're going to have a business that thrives?
How far would your business go if you put Google and other similar search engines off limits in your company?
Well,
In what ways would that handicap you?
it would be a
All right.
significant handicap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in fact, you're already using AI. You may not have thought about it as AI, but I'm telling you, it's impressive AI. Google is an impressive AI solution. The question is with the OpenAI generative AI large language model solutions that are now available, as companies start to learn all the different things that those can do to speed up their productivity, and they are already significant and many, it will become as commonplace to be using a chat GPT like solution in all aspects or almost all aspects of a business as Google is today. Whether you're doing ordering parts, you're using Google. Whether you're searching for technical specifications for something, you're using Google. The list goes on and on and on. Anything that a business is doing, I mean, folks' knee-jerk reaction is to go to Google and find it, or go to YouTube, which is
or to Amazon if you're looking for a product, right?
Right.
Similar
Right.
technology supporting
Right.
that system as well. I'm having a lot of fun right now at Avenue 7 Media, and you're partly to blame. It is a very exciting time. As we looked at the promise of AI, we also looked at some of the downside risks. And this is the reason why we went out and did another fundraise to put a pot of capital to apply to these technology systems. Because one of the things that concerned us is we want to protect our clients' proprietary information as best as possible. And so connecting to Sam Altman's ChatGPT or some of the other systems gave us pause and gave us a lot of concern. Last week, Mark Zuckerberg and a lot of tech companies were thrown out in front of Congress, and they're getting embarrassed every time they get in front of Congress because it turns out their systems didn't put some checks and balances in place to do things like protect young girls, right? Or to protect children. It's one of the reasons why we decided to build our own systems and house them in our own walled garden to not only protect our clients' proprietary information, but our own systems and processes that we've spent so many years and in many cases, decades refining. Do you have any concerns about big tech and companies using some of these other systems that aren't, maybe they may say it in the terms of services that we're going to protect you, we're going to protect your data? What kind of concerns do you have, and what can big tech do better and differently to assuage some of those concerns?
Well, unfortunately, human history is replete with examples of figuring out ways to use great new technology in destructive, horrible ways.
By the way, I can only imagine what you guys were working on in the Army. I know you can't talk about it, but I can only imagine. I've seen those movies.
I wouldn't say we were doing the movie stuff, but yeah, we were doing interesting things. It was fascinating to be a part of some of those projects. So the question that you have is, should there be some guardrails put in place that keep the business world from abusing this technology? Is that really the question that you're asking?
I think that's definitely a part of the question. Sure. Any new thing can do tremendous good, but also has a potential for bad, right? Think of fire, right? It can keep you warm. It can heat your house, and it can also burn your house.
Think of gunpowder.
That's right.
Think of TNT is what got Nobel prizes started, right? I used to do some nuclear engineering stuff, which is using fission to create electricity, right? Power stations that run off of uranium or whatever else you're using. So that technology in France, almost all of their electricity is produced by nuclear power. Okay, and they've not had any significant accidents in 50, 60 years of So you can use that stuff for a lot of good, but it's also exactly the same technology that's used to create nuclear weapons, right? I mean, there's another classic example, and I would put AI in that same space as nuclear technology. The potential scope of the good that it could do is enormous, and the potential scope of the bad that it could do is enormous. And so then the question is, what do we do to try and restrict and moderate the bad side and accentuate the good side? And at this point, I go, yeah, that's above my pay grade.
Given our political situation right now, I hope I'm hoping against hope that this will resolve itself. But I love your analogy to the nuclear industry and the nuclear technology. I think it's perfect. It's a perfect analogy. Dr. Richard Routh, we appreciate you so much here at Avenue 7. Thank you for coming on the Day 2 podcast and giving a little perspective to the hype that is out there right now. I really appreciate it. Thank you again for your service and sacrifice to our country, for out there being a moral compass in the space in AI. And I appreciate you greatly. If anyone wants to get a hold of you to talk about how you may help their business or to talk more about this fascinating topic we just talked about, what's the best way to reach you?
Try7services.com. TRI, the number 7, the word services.com. Takes you to our website, and you can find links to my email and telephone number there.
If you're ready to start growing and protecting your brand on Amazon with a team of experienced Amazon operators and technology, you can visit us at day2podcast.com. That's day2podcast.com. Lastly, if you know anyone else who would benefit from the amazing content that you just heard on this podcast, please share it with them. Thank you for listening and happy selling.